Hello, this is Red Chair Reading. I'm Hobie Wan, and I'm reading The Ghost at Skeleton Rock, Chapter 7, Twin Cities. As the Hardys whirled around from the airport lockers, they saw a dark-haired, hard-jawed man of medium build eyeing them coldly. He flipped open his coat and flashed a detective's badge. "Now then, who are you and what's your game?" "We're Frank and Joe Hardy," Frank said coolly. "Our father is Fenton Hardy, the investigator. While we're at it, maybe you wouldn't mind telling us who you are." "Shanley, airport detective," the man replied crisply. Opening his wallet, he showed them his detective's license. "You two still haven't told me what you're up to," he prodded. We're not up to anything," Joe said tersely. Shanley was annoyed. "Let's have a look at that leather case," he demanded. But Frank interposed. "If you want to see the contents, let's go to the police headquarters." "Okay," the detective grumbled. "Come on, we'll go in my car." The Hardys agreed, and the trio headed out through the glass door of the terminal building, with Joe clutching the briefcase. "Car's over there at the far end of the lot," Shanley pointed. As they started across the parking area, Joe caught his brother's eye. He made a slight gesture toward the zippered case. Frank nodded. Turning to Shanley, Frank started chattering casually. "Do you have an office here in Eastern City?" he inquired. While Frank distracted the detective's attention, Joe gave the zipper a quick jerk. Inside, he caught a glimpse of several thin, flat boxes sealed in cellophane. They bore a drug manufacturer's label with the name Variotrycin. Joe pulled the zipper shut before Shanley noticed anything. The young detective's mind was racing. Variotricins, that new wonder drug I read about in the papers, Joe thought. But what has a new wonder drug to do with dummies and the diamonds or Skeleton Rock 176? Joe, deeply engrossed in trying to find out an answer to the puzzle, was taken off guard by three men who suddenly darted out from between two cars parked nearby. "We'll take that case," snarled the leader, a burly, bald-headed man in a polo shirt. "Oh, no, you won't," Joe ducked and threw up an arm to protect himself. Frank leaped to his assistance, fists flying, as the hoodlums tried to grab the case. To their astonishment, Shanley had disappeared, but there was no time to speculate about what had happened to him, as Frank drove home a punch that split the lip of his adversary, while Joe gave another of the men a blow that sent him reeling. In doing so, Joe dropped the case he had held under his left arm. As the young detective stooped to pick it up, he was amazed to have it snatched from the ground by none other than Shanley. The detective had crept up from behind. "Thanks," Shanley sneered and sprinted for his car. The Hardys were powerless to stop him. With the odds 3 against 2, their attackers were pressing the boys harder than before, furiously. Frank and Joe swung their fists with telling effect. One of their opponents howled with pain as Joe caught him on the nose. A second later, the bald-headed leader winced and groaned under the walloping impact of Frank's fist under his chin. Even so, the fight began to go against the boys. Step by step, they were being driven back and hemmed in against the bumper of a parked car. Then, suddenly, the tide of battle turned. The burly, bald-headed man was jerked around and struck on the jaw by a blow that rocked him on his heels. "Tony!" Joe cheered, heartened by the unexpected help. The Hardys put forth a fresh surge of fighting fury. Their assailants lost heart rapidly. "These guys are too tough. I'm getting out of here," gasped one of the ruffians. Pulling loose from the fray, he turned and ran, with Tony after him. The bald-headed ringleader followed, with Frank at his heels. As the third hoodlum tried to join in the getaway, Joe dropped him with a flying tackle. But the leader and the other ruffian kicked off their pursuers and leaped into a car that was waiting for them on the road beyond the parking area. At the wheel was Shanley. Discouraged by this latest development, Frank and Tony went back to Joe, who was holding their prisoner. The fellow was bony and pinch-faced and wore a cheap-looking pinstripe suit. "We're taking you to police headquarters," Joe told him. The sullen man shifted uneasily but kept quiet as the group headed for the taxi stand. "By the way, fellows," Tony said, "would you mind telling me what this is all about?" Frank gave him a quick account of the phony detective and the unexpected attack. "Thanks for coming to our rescue. You really saved the day." "Ditto," put in Joe. "If it hadn't been for you, we wouldn't have this prisoner. By the way, Tony, you better tell Jack Wayne what happened. We'll be back soon." "Okay," Tony agreed, "but don't let Buster Boy here pull any more fast ones." As he headed back to the hangar, Frank and Joe hustled their prisoner into one of the waiting taxis. "Police headquarters," Frank directed the driver. A few minutes later, the taxi pulled up in front of the brick building. The sergeant in charge led the Hardys and their prisoner into the office of Inspector Moon, a friend of Fenton Hardy. He greeted the boys warmly and then said to a detective, "Take this man into the interrogation room and get the facts." Inspector Moon turned back to Frank and Joe. "Now give me the whole story." The boys related everything that had happened at the airport terminal, including the way Shanley had led them into an ambush and then stolen the leather case. "What did Shanley look like?" the officer asked. As Frank gave a description of the man, the inspector frowned and shook his head. "That wasn't Shanley." "He was impersonating him, you mean?" Frank asked. "We saw his detective's license." "Sure, they were the real Shanleys, all right. His house was broken into last night and all his credentials stolen," the inspector explained. Frank and Joe asked to read the report of the robbery, but found no clues of interest. In answer to Inspector Moon's questions, they explained that they were helping their father on a case and described their brush with Hugo and Abdul at the wooded site. "I'll put out a call for them right away," Inspector Moon said. He picked up his phone and ordered that an alarm be sent to all radio cars. "One thing I don't understand is why that Latin American fellow at the airport slipped me the gloves and key," said Joe, after the officer hung up. "Couldn't he tell just by looking at me that I wasn't the right guy?" "Maybe you do look like the right guy," Inspector Moon pointed out. "Wow, I never thought of that." Despite the seriousness of the situation, Frank suddenly grinned. "Good night, my brother, looking like some underworld character." Then he sobered. "If this is some kind of a racket, like a theft ring for passing stolen goods, we now have a good description of one of the members." "Right," the inspector agreed. "I'll pass the word around for the men to be on the lookout for a fellow answering Joe's description." "But of the criminal type, please," Joe pleaded. Just then the door of the interrogation room opened and the plainclothesman came out with the prisoner. "Learn anything?" Inspector Moon asked the detective. "No," he replied. "He wouldn't even tell us his name. Any identification?" the inspector queried. "Not even a driver's license. Only thing that might help is this tattoo." The detective pulled up the prisoner's sleeve to show a pineapple tattoo on his left forearm. It's not much to go on," the inspector said. "But check the files. Anything else?" "Yes, sir. The prisoner was carrying these in his pocket, together with a ticket to Mexico." With a baffled look, the detective held up a pair of doll's glass eyes. Instantly, the Hardys realized they were just like the dummy's eyes, which had contained uncut diamonds. That is the end of Chapter 7. Click the button for the next chapter and click the subscribe button. I'll be back soon. If I could just use the clicker properly.